20 years. For 20 years she slept in the same bed, sat at the same breakfast table, bore 2 children from the same man, and for 20 years she could never explain that shiver, that inexplicable unease that crept through her bones whenever he held her in the dark until her husband died. And she opened his closet. Inside she found a black mask, and 405 days of buried nightmare came flooding back. But this time she wouldn't wake up from it, because the nightmare wasn't over. She had married it. She had loved it, and now it was dead. But the truth was very much alive. Irene didn't sit down during our first session. She stood by the door, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes scanning every corner of the room. She had been in therapy for 20 years. But this was the first time she behaved like this. "Can we leave the door open?" she asked. Her voice carried the tremor of a child, not a 44-year-old woman. I nodded and propped the door ajar, because I understood. That basement door had always been locked, for 405 days, and now she had learned that the hand which locked that door was the same hand that had placed a ring on her finger. The same fingers, the same touch. As she spoke, she kept looking at her own hands. "I can still feel his touch," she whispered, "but I don't know which one anymore. The one that imprisoned me, or the one that loved me." I watched her carefully. There was something else, something she wasn't telling me yet. Something about those 20 years of marriage that went beyond the mask in the closet. In some sessions, my patients heal as they speak, but some stories, they never leave my mind. Today, I'm going to share one of those lives with you. If you're listening to this story and you too have things you cannot hold inside, share what you're feeling in the comments and tell me where you're listening from. I read every comment, I hear every story. If you want to be notified about the therapy stories, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If this story touches your heart, you can support me by liking it. One day I would love to hear your story too. If you want me to share your story in my next video, you can send it to the email address in my profile. Remember, our stories heal, even just a little, when they're shared. Irene finally moved from the door. Not to the couch, to the window. She needed to see outside. She needed to know she could leave. I have worked with trauma survivors for 22 years. I have sat with veterans who couldn't close their eyes without seeing blood. I've held space for women who flinched at every unexpected sound. But Irene was different. She wasn't just carrying the weight of 405 days in a basement. She was carrying the weight of 405 days plus 20 years of marriage, 20 years of sleeping next to her captor, 20 years of building a life with the man who had shattered her. And she didn't know. Her body knew, her instincts screamed. But her conscious mind, the part that wanted to believe in love, in rescue, in happy endings, that part had been completely deceived. "He saved me," she said, her voice hollow. "That's what I believed for 20 years. Thomas saved me." I leaned forward slightly. "Tell me about the day he saved you." Her fingers tightened around her arms, hugging herself. A self-protective gesture I had seen hundreds of times, but with Irene, it carried a different weight. "Day 405. She began. The door opened, but it was different. There was light and a face. An actual face, not the mask. "He said the police had received a tip. He said he was the one who found me." She turned from the window. Her eyes met mine for the first time. "He held my hand all the way to the hospital. He never left my side. Everyone else, my family, my friends, they all pulled away eventually. They didn't know how to handle what happened to me, but Thomas stayed." A classic trauma bond formation, I noted internally, but this was engineered, deliberately constructed. "When did you start dating?" I asked. 2 years after. He was patient, so patient. He never pushed. He let me heal at my own pace." She laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Or so I thought. Now I realize he was waiting, like a hunter who had already caught his prey and was simply watching it forget it was ever caught." I remained still. In moments like these, the therapist must become a mirror, reflecting, not reacting. But inside, I felt the weight of what she was describing. This wasn't just captivity. This was a complete psychological operation. A predator who didn't just take 405 days. He took an entire life. "Irene," I said gently, "you mentioned you found something else besides the mask." Her body went rigid. The color drained from her face. "Not yet," she whispered. I can't, not yet. I nodded. The trauma would reveal itself in layers. It always did. But whatever she had found, it was worse than the mask, and that terrified me, because what could be worse than discovering your husband was your kidnapper? Irene grew up in a small town in Ohio. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors stayed unlocked, where the biggest crime was teenagers stealing beer from the gas station. Her father, Robert, was a carpenter who built furniture with his hands and taught Irene to measure twice and cut once. Her mother, Catherine, worked at the local library and read to Irene every night until she was 12 years old. They weren't wealthy, but they were present. They showed up to every school play, every soccer game, every piano recital. Irene described her childhood with a mixture of warmth and grief. I had the kind of childhood people make movies about, she said. The good kind, the kind where you believe the world is safe. This is what made her the perfect target, I noted internally. A young woman raised with love, with trust, with the expectation that the world would treat her gently. She had no defenses against what was coming because she had never needed them. Irene was the kind of daughter every parent hopes for. She got good grades without being pushed. She had friends but wasn't consumed by social drama. She was curious about the world but grounded in her values. When she was 17, she won a statewide art competition. The prize was a scholarship to Ohio State. My parents cried when I got the letter, she said. They had been saving for years, worried they couldn't afford to send me to college. And then this scholarship came and it felt like the universe was telling me that good things happen to good people. She paused, her hands twisted in her lap. I believed that for a long time. Even after everything, I believed there was some meaning to suffering, some lesson, some purpose. Her voice hardened. I don't believe that anymore. That belief shattered when she was 19. She had just started her second year at Ohio State, graphic design major. She had dreams of moving to New York, working for a big advertising firm, living the kind of life she had only seen in magazines. She was talented. Her professors said she had a rare eye for composition, for color, for the subtle ways that images communicate emotion. Thomas saw that too. He saw everything about her, for months before she knew he existed. On October 14, 2001, she left a campus party at 11 p.m. She was walking back to her dorm, a 7-minute walk she had done 100 times before. The night was cool. The leaves were changing. She remembered thinking about a design project due the next week, about the boy she had danced with at the party, about calling her mother in the morning. She never made it. The last thing I remember from that night is the smell of leaves, Irene said. It had just rained. The ground was wet, and then a hand over my mouth, something sharp against my neck, and darkness. She woke up in a basement, concrete walls, a single mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, no windows, one door, always locked, and a man in a black mask. He never spoke above a whisper, she continued. Her voice had dropped as if she were back in that basement, afraid of being heard. I never saw his face. I never knew if it was day or night. Time became meaningless. I observed the shift in her breathing. Shallow, rapid. Her body was reliving the trauma even as her mind tried to narrate it. What did he do during those 4 and 5 days, Irene? She closed her eyes. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. Everything, she whispered. Everything you can imagine, and things you can't. When trauma occurs in complete sensory deprivation, no natural light, no sense of time, no human face to anchor to, the brain enters a state of profound disorientation. The victim loses not just their freedom but their very sense of reality. Irene's captor understood this. The mask wasn't just for anonymity, it was a psychological tool. By denying her the ability to see a human face, he stripped away her ability to form any predictive model of her abuser. She couldn't read his expressions, couldn't anticipate his moods, couldn't find any pattern that might give her a sense of control. This is textbook, learned helplessness taken to its extreme, and it was deliberate. Tell me exactly what happened on day 4 and 5, I said. Irene took a shaky breath. I had stopped counting by then, but I know now it was 405 days because I found his journal. She reached into her bag and pulled out a worn leather notebook. Her hands trembled as she held it. This was in his study, with the mask, with everything else. She didn't open it. Not yet. That day the door opened differently. Usually I could hear him unlocking it, 3 locks always in the same order, but that day it was loud, forceful, and then light. Real light. And a face. Thomas's face, I said. She nodded. He was wearing a police jacket. He said, "It's over. You're safe. I'm gonna get you out of here." Her voice cracked, and I believed him. God, I believed him so completely. He was the first human face I had seen in over a year. He was everything. This is the cruelest part of the design, I thought. He didn't just kidnap her, he created the perfect conditions for her to bond with him completely. Stockholm Syndrome, engineered from the ground up. Did the police ever find the kidnapper? I asked, already knowing the answer. No, she said. The case went cold. They said whoever did it was careful. No DNA, no witnesses, nothing. Because there was nothing to find. Because the kidnapper was the one holding her hand at the hospital. The one who testified at the police station, the one who slowly, methodically inserted himself into her life as her savior. But here's what haunted me as Irene spoke. If Thomas was the kidnapper, how did he stage his own rescue? How did he walk her out of that basement into the arms of real police officers and not get caught? The answer was, in that leather journal. And when Irene finally opened it during our 3rd session, what she read inside made everything infinitely worse. Thomas had a contact inside the police department, a detective named Marcus Webb, a man who owed Thomas money from gambling debts. Marcus made the anonymous tip. Marcus ensured Thomas was first on scene. Marcus buried any evidence that might have pointed to Thomas. And when the case went cold, it was Marcus who signed off on closing the investigation. This wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a conspiracy. And the system that was supposed to protect Irene had been compromised from the inside. 20 years of marriage, 2 children, a house in the suburbs with a white picket fence, and a golden retriever named Max. Dinner parties with neighbors, vacations to the beach, Christmas cards with smiling faces. From the outside, Irene had built the perfect recovery story. The girl who was kidnapped, rescued, and went on to live a beautiful life. Local newspapers had even featured her once. Survivor finds love with her rescuer. The article praised Thomas's patience, his dedication, his unwavering support. He kept that article framed in his study, Irene would later tell me. Right next to the mask. Everyone thought it was so romantic, Irene said, her voice dripping with bitterness. The man who saved her, who waited for her, who helped her heal. Our wedding was covered by 3 local news stations. They called it a triumph of love over trauma. Thomas gave interviews about never giving up on me. She pressed her palms against her eyes. I thought it was romantic too. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Other survivors struggled to find partners. Other survivors couldn't trust. But I had Thomas. Patient, gentle, understanding Thomas. But her body knew something was wrong. It always knew. There were nights, she whispered, when he would hold me, and I would feel this wave of nausea, this inexplicable fear. I told my therapist about it. She said it was normal. Trauma responses, body memories. She said it would fade with time. It never faded. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I would wake up and see him watching me, just watching. And I would tell myself it was love. He was just looking at his wife. But there was something in his eyes, something cold, something that made my skin crawl. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was broken, that my trauma was making me see danger where there was only love. She wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture I had seen countless times in my office, but with Irene it carried the weight of 20 years of unheard warnings. There were other things, she continued, things I was too ashamed to tell anyone. Some mornings I would wake up feeling wrong, disoriented, heavy, like I'd been drugged. My body would ache in places I couldn't explain. Thomas would bring breakfast in bed and tell me I had been restless, talking in my sleep. He said I should increase my anxiety medication. The anxiety medication, I noted, that he controlled. I blamed myself, she said, her voice cracking, for not being able to fully enjoy intimacy with my husband, for flinching when he touched me unexpectedly, for the nightmares that never stopped. I thought I was the problem, that I was failing at being healed. What she was describing, I realized, was her nervous system recognizing danger that her conscious mind refused to accept. For 20 years her body had been screaming the truth, and for 20 years she had silenced it, because the alternative was too horrifying to contemplate. Thomas died of a heart attack 3 months before Irene came to see me. He was 52 years old. By all accounts, it was sudden and unexpected. I grieved, she said. I genuinely grieved. For the first few weeks, I couldn't function. The kids had to take care of me. I was a mess. Then came the task of going through his belongings. He had a study in the basement, she said. He was always protective of it, said it was his private space. I respected that. In 20 years of marriage, I never went in there. After he died too. There were documents to find, insurance papers, bank statements. What she found instead destroyed everything. The closet in his study had a false back, she said. I only found it because I dropped a pen, and it rolled under the crack. Behind the false wall, boxes, dozens of boxes. The first one I opened had the mask, the black mask, and I thought maybe he had kept it as evidence, maybe the police had given it to him. I tried to rationalize it. But then she opened the second box. Photos. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. Hundreds of photos. Of me, before the kidnapping, walking to class, eating lunch, sleeping in my dorm room. He had been watching her for months before he took her. And then I opened the third box. She stopped. Her whole body began to shake. Irene, I said gently, what was in the third box? She looked at me with eyes that had seen something no human should ever see. Videos, she said, from our marriage, from our bedroom. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for self-protection. When reality becomes too threatening, we create narratives that allow us to survive. Irene had spent 20 years constructing a story of rescue, love, and healing. That story was the foundation of her entire adult identity. What she discovered in that basement study didn't just challenge that story, it annihilated it. Every memory, every moment of intimacy, every time she had felt safe in her husband's arms, all of it was now contaminated. This is what we call retrospective trauma. The past itself becomes poisoned. Not just the 405 days in the basement, but every single day that followed. Irene couldn't speak for several minutes after mentioning the videos. I waited. In trauma work, silence is not emptiness, it's processing. When she finally continued, her voice had changed, flatter, more detached. A protective dissociation. At first I thought they were normal, just recordings of us. Intimate. But we were married. Couples do that sometimes, right? She wrapped her arms around herself again. But then I noticed something. In some of the videos, I wasn't responsive. I was asleep, deeply asleep, and he was. She couldn't say it. She didn't have to. I never remembered those nights, she said, her voice barely audible. I would wake up feeling strange, heavy, like I had been drugged. And I would tell myself it was just exhaustion, stress. The medication I was on for anxiety, the medication I observed internally. Who prescribed it? Irene, who managed your medications during your marriage? Thomas, she said immediately. Then she froze. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Thomas he always prepared my evening tea. He said it helped me sleep, he said. She bent forward, clutching her stomach. He was drugging me for 20 years. He never stopped. The basement never ended. It just changed shape. What Thomas had constructed was a prison without visible bars. The house with the white picket fence was just another cell. The marriage certificate was just another lock. And the drugging, the systematic, calculated chemical violation, was his way of returning to the basement whenever he wanted. This is a pattern I have seen before in cases of extreme domestic predation. The abuser creates two realities, the public performance of normalcy and the private continuation of abuse. The victim is trapped between these two worlds, unable to reconcile them, often blaming themselves for the dissonance they feel. Irene's body had been trying to tell her the truth for 2 decades. The nausea, the unexplained bruises, the mornings of disorientation, these weren't symptoms of her trauma, they were evidence of ongoing assault. This is what I couldn't stop thinking about after that session. For 20 years, Irene believed she was healing. She believed she was building a new life. She believed she had escaped, but she hadn't escaped anything. She had been transferred from one prison to another. The walls were nicer, the bed was softer. But the captor was the same, and the violation never stopped. How do you grieve a marriage that was never real? How do you grieve a rescue that was actually a capture? How do you grieve a love that was, from the very first moment, a calculated predation? And the worst question, how do you explain any of this to your children? In our fourth session, Irene brought the leather journal. I've read it, she said. All of it. I need you to understand who he really was. She opened to the first page. The handwriting was neat, methodical. He started following me 8 months before the kidnapping, she said. He saw me at a coffee shop near campus. He wrote about it. He wrote about how pure I looked, how untouched. He wrote that he knew from that first moment that I was meant to be his. She turned the pages with trembling fingers. He detailed everything. How he rented the basement, how he soundproofed it, how he practiced wearing the mask, speaking in whispers, disguising his scent. His scent, I noted. She mentioned earlier that his scent sometimes seemed familiar. He wrote about the rescue too, she continued. He planned it for months. He knew exactly when the police would receive the anonymous tip. He knew exactly how to position himself as the first responder. He knew a detective, someone who owed him a favor. That's how he got the police jacket. That's how he walked me out of that basement and into the arms of the people who were supposed to save me. Thomas was not impulsive. He was a meticulous predator. Every detail of his operation, from the initial stalking to the rescue to the marriage, was calculated with surgical precision. This level of planning indicates a profound disturbance, not psychosis. Thomas was completely in touch with reality. This was psychopathy in its purest form. The ability to understand human emotions without feeling them, the ability to mimic love, concern, patience, all while pursuing an agenda of complete ownership. Irene was never a wife to him. She was a possession, a trophy, a project. And the videos, the drugging, the continued violation during their marriage revealed something even darker. The basement wasn't an aberration, it was Thomas's true self. The marriage was simply a more sophisticated cage. Through the journal and subsequent research, we pieced together Thomas's history. He grew up in a wealthy family in Connecticut. His father was a successful surgeon. His mother was a socialite who cared more about appearances than parenting. Thomas was the middle child, overlooked, ignored, treated as an afterthought. He wrote about his childhood. Irene said, he felt invisible. He wrote that the first time he felt truly powerful was when he was 16. He had trapped a stray cat in his family's pool house. She didn't elaborate, she didn't need to. Thomas graduated from Yale with a degree in psychology. Of course, I thought. He studied his prey academically before hunting them in practice. He worked in corporate consulting, the kind of job that paid well and asked few questions. He was charming, successful, admired. No one suspected what lived beneath the surface. The journal mentions others. Irene's voice was barely audible now. Before me, he doesn't give names, just numbers. I was number 7. 7. Irene was the 7th woman Thomas had targeted, but she was the only one he married. Why me? She asked. Why did he choose to keep me? I considered my response carefully. From what you've described, Thomas was escalating. Each experience was longer, more elaborate than the last. You weren't just a victim to him, Irene. You were his masterpiece, his longest project, his permanent acquisition. She stared at me. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, I said honestly. It's supposed to help you understand that nothing about this was your fault. You didn't attract him because of something you did. You attracted him because you were exactly what his particular pathology sought. And that pathology was present long before you were born. But there was one more revelation in that journal. One more layer of horror that Irene hadn't yet spoken about, something that connected Thomas's past to Irene's present in a way that would shatter what remained of her world. And it involved her children. Irene had 2 children with Thomas. Matthew, now 19, was a freshman at the same university where Irene had been abducted. Lily, 17, was a high school senior. They adored him, Irene said, her voice breaking. He was the perfect father, patient, attentive, present for every game, every recital, every parent-teacher conference. The perfect performance, I thought, sustained for 20 years. Matthew looks exactly like him, she continued, the same eyes, and every time I look at my son now, I see... She couldn't finish. How are they handling this, I asked. They don't know, she said. They think their father died a hero, the man who saved their mother, the man who loved her through her trauma. How do I tell them the truth? This was the question that had brought her to me, not just the trauma of the discovery, but the impossible choice that lay ahead. If I tell them, I destroy their memory of their father. Their entire childhood becomes a lie. But if I don't tell them, you carry the burden alone. I finished, she nodded, and I'm already carrying so much, too much. Irene faced what we call an impossible disclosure. There was no right answer. Telling her children would transfer some of her trauma to them, potentially damaging their psychological development and their sense of self. But not telling them would force Irene to maintain a lie, to continue performing the role of grieving widow, even as she processed the reality of victimhood. In cases like this, I typically recommend a graduated disclosure. But Irene's situation had a complication I hadn't anticipated, a complication that changed everything. During our 6th session, Irene arrived with a new box, not from Thomas's study, from Lily's room. I was putting away laundry, she said. I found these under her mattress. She placed a stack of photographs on the table between us. My blood ran cold. They were surveillance photos of young women walking on campus paths, eating in cafeterias, sleeping in dorm rooms. The same composition, the same angles, the same predatory gaze, but they weren't taken by Thomas. The dates on the backs were from the last 2 years. Thomas had been alive when some of them were taken, but others were from after his death. Where did Lily get these? I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. Irene's hands shook. I don't know. I haven't asked her yet. I came straight here. I looked at the photographs again. Something was different about them. The style was similar to Thomas's but not identical, as if someone had been taught his techniques but hadn't fully mastered them. Tell me about your children, I said. What are they like? Irene's face softened for a moment, a mother's reflex. Lily is... She's always been the quiet one. Observant. She notices things other people miss. When she was little, she used to draw portraits of everyone in the family. She'd capture these tiny details, the way Thomas held his coffee cup, the way I tilted my head when I was worried. She sees people. An observer, I thought. In a house full of secrets, she learned to watch. And Matthew? The softness disappeared. Matthew was always Thomas's son. From the moment he could walk, he followed his father everywhere. They had rituals, private jokes, a language I was never part of. I used to think it was beautiful, this bond between father and son. She swallowed hard. But there were moments that felt wrong. Matthew would look at me sometimes with this coldness, like he was studying me, evaluating me, and when I'd ask Thomas about it, he'd laugh and say, Matthew was just going through a phase. Not a phase, I understood. Training. Thomas was teaching his son to see women the way he did, as objects to be studied, evaluated, acquired. Is there any chance that he spent time alone with Matthew? Taught him things? The color drained from her face. They were close, very close. Thomas called it father-son bonding time. Every weekend from the time Matthew was 14, they would go to a cabin Thomas owned upstate. Just the two of them. I asked to come once. Thomas said it was guy stuff. He said I wouldn't understand. A cabin, I registered. That was never mentioned to police. A cabin that likely contained more than hunting gear and fishing rods. The photos, Irene said, her voice rising in panic. The photos are in Lily's room, but the style, you're saying Matthew? I didn't want to say what I was thinking, but Irene needed to hear it. I'm saying we need to consider the possibility that Thomas didn't just victimize you. He may have been grooming his son to continue his legacy. And this was the moment the true scope of the horror became clear. Thomas wasn't just a predator, he was a teacher. And his greatest student might be living under Irene's roof. The photographs in Lily's room, were they her collection, or were they placed there by someone else? Someone who had access to every room in that house. Someone who had learned from a master. Someone who was watching. The transmission of predatory behavior from parent to child is one of the most disturbing phenomena in my field. It doesn't happen through genetics alone. It happens through modeling, through grooming, through the systematic shaping of a young mind to see the world through a predator's eyes. Thomas had 5 years alone with Matthew at that cabin, 5 years to teach him techniques, 5 years to normalize surveillance, objectification, ownership, 5 years to transform his son into a reflection of himself, And Matthew had been an eager student. The coldness Irene described, the evaluating looks, these were signs that Thomas's lessons had taken root. Irene didn't come to her next scheduled appointment, or the one after that. When she finally returned, 3 weeks later, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her clothes hung loose, her eyes were hollow. I confronted him, she said without preamble. I asked Matthew about the cabin, about what his father taught him. I waited. At first, he denied everything. He said they just hunted and fished, normal father-son things. She laughed, a hollow, horrifying sound, and then I showed him the photos from Lily's room. She pressed her hands against her face. He didn't get angry, he didn't get defensive, he just smiled, the exact same smile as Thomas, and he said, she choked on the words. He said, Dad always told me you would figure it out eventually. He said the smartest ones always do. Generational transmission of predatory behavior. It's one of the darkest aspects of my field. Children don't just inherit their parents' eye color or musical ability. They can inherit their pathologies, their patterns, their poisons. Thomas hadn't just been grooming victims, he had been grooming his own son, transmitting his predatory worldview, his techniques, his compulsions, and he had been doing it for years right under Irene's nose in a cabin where no one could witness. Matthew wasn't just Thomas's son, he was Thomas's successor. Irene moved quickly after that confrontation. She took Lily and fled to her parents' home in Ohio. Matthew stayed in the house. He was 19, legally an adult. She couldn't force him to leave. He didn't try to stop us, she said. He just watched us pack, and when we got into the car, he stood in the doorway and waved, like it was normal, like we were just going on vacation. She shuddered. The police are involved now. I showed them Thomas's journal, the photographs, everything, but there's nothing concrete tying Matthew to any crime. He hasn't actually done anything that they can prove. So they're watching, waiting. And Lily? I asked. She's terrified and confused and angry at me for taking her away from her home, her school, her friends. Irene's voice broke. She doesn't understand why her brother has suddenly become someone to fear. She thinks I've lost my mind from grief. The cruelest trick of trauma is that it often isolates the victim. No one believes their story. No one understands their fear. The predator walks free, and the prey is treated as the unstable one. Irene had escaped a monster, only to discover she had raised one. And no one, not even her own daughter, could see the danger that was still out there, still watching, still waiting. In our 10th session, Irene arrived with Lily. I wasn't expecting this. We had been doing individual work. But Irene said Lily had insisted. She wanted to speak to me directly. Lily was 17 but looked younger, fragile. Her eyes darted around my office like a cornered animal, but there was something else behind the fear, a steely determination I hadn't expected. I need to tell you something, she said, something I've never told anyone. Irene tensed beside her. Lily took a shaky breath. Those photos under my mattress, Matthew didn't hide them there. I took them. The room went silent. I stole them from his room, she continued, because I knew something was wrong. I've known for years. He's not right, and I thought if I could find evidence maybe someone would believe me. Irene reached for her daughter's hand. Why didn't you tell me? Because you loved Dad. Lily's voice dropped low. And Matthew is just like Dad. I was scared you wouldn't see it, that you'd choose them over me. That's what always happened. Dad's word was law. Matthew was the golden child, and I was just the quiet one, the one who watched. The family dynamic, I understood in that moment, had been poisoned from the beginning. Even the children were caught in a web of secrets and fear. And Lily, sweet, observant Lily, had been silently gathering evidence for years, knowing no one would believe her unless she had proof. When did you first suspect something was wrong with Matthew? I asked gently. Lily's jaw tightened. When I was 13, I caught him in my room, going through my things, my underwear drawer. He said he was looking for something he'd lost, but his face, the way he looked at me when I walked in, it was the same look Dad had sometimes, that evaluating look, like I was a thing, not a person. Irene made a small, wounded sound. I started locking my door after that, Lily continued, and I started watching him, the way he watched other girls at school. The way he talked about them, the way he and Dad would have these conversations that stopped whenever I entered the room. What else do you know, Lily? She looked at her mother, then at me, then at her own hands. "I know where the cabin is," she said. "I followed them once, took Dad's spare car, and followed them. They didn't know, and I know what's in the basement. I saw Matthew carrying boxes down there, boxes like the ones you found in Dad's study. Another basement, another locked door, another secret kept in darkness. But this time, there was a witness, someone who had been watching the watchers, someone who had kept silent out of fear, but was now ready to speak. A 17-year-old girl had done what no one else could. She had seen through the performance. She had trusted her own instincts when everyone around her was telling her she was wrong, and she had gathered the evidence that would finally expose the truth. But Lily's revelations raised a terrifying question. If she had been watching Matthew all these years, had Matthew been watching her too? The photographs in his room, the surveillance techniques he had learned, the way he had access to every corner of their house. Had Lily been gathering evidence on her brother, while her brother was gathering evidence on her? Police executed a search warrant on Thomas's cabin the day after Lily gave her statement. Irene wasn't allowed to be present, but she was given a full report afterward. Soundproofed basement, she told me, her voice mechanical. Same construction as the one where he kept me. They found journals, videos, documentation of everything he did. She swallowed hard, and they found evidence of others. The ones before me, the 6 others, did they identify them? 3 of them, she said. All were reported missing in the 1990s. All were assumed dead. Their families were notified. 3 families who had spent decades not knowing what happened to their daughters. Now they knew. And that knowledge was both a blessing and a curse. But the investigation didn't end with Thomas and Matthew. Remember the detective I mentioned earlier? Marcus Webb, the man who had helped Thomas stage the rescue, who had buried evidence, who had closed the case. He was still on the force, still working cases, still in a position to protect other predators. When Irene's story went public, 2 other women came forward. Women who had reported stalking incidents in the early 2000s, women whose cases had been dismissed by Detective Webb, women who had described suspects matching Thomas's description. The investigation into Webb was ongoing, but what it had already revealed was chilling. Thomas may have had protection for decades, and there may be other victims whose cases were deliberately buried. What about Matthew? I asked. He's in custody. They found his notebooks at the cabin too, his own journals, detailed plans, photographs, a list of potential. She couldn't say the word. A list of names, young women, college students, girls who looked remarkably like Irene had at 19. He never got to act on it, she continued. Thomas was training him. They were going to hunt together, father and son, but Thomas died before he could. She broke down completely. I moved to sit beside her. In moments like these, protocol takes a backseat to humanity. I let her cry. I let her grieve, because she was grieving so many things at once. The loss of her husband, even though that husband was a monster. The loss of her son, even though that son had been corrupted beyond saving. The loss of her own past, every memory now tainted with new meaning. And the loss of safety itself. The fundamental belief that we can know the people who share our lives. Irene's healing would not be linear. It couldn't be. She wasn't processing a single trauma, but an entire architecture of betrayal, the initial abduction, the years in recovery that were actually continued captivity, the discovery, the truth about her son, the investigation, the public exposure. Each layer brought new grief, new anger, new questions that might never have answers. But there was something else too, something I hadn't expected to see so soon. Hope, tiny, fragile, persistent, like a blade of grass pushing through concrete. Irene had survived 405 days in a basement. She had survived 20 years of invisible imprisonment. She had survived the complete destruction of her reality. And she was still here, still fighting, still reaching for light. That resilience, that stubborn, inexplicable will to continue, was the seed from which genuine healing could grow. Months passed. Matthew awaited trial. The media circus eventually died down, and in the quiet aftermath, Irene and Lily began the slow work of rebuilding. Their first apartment together was small, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that barely fit both of them at the same time. But it was theirs. No secrets hidden in the walls. No locked studies in the basement, no history of horrors. I repainted every room, Irene told me. Lily helped. We chose bright colors, yellow for the kitchen, blue for the living room. Colors Thomas would have hated. He liked everything white, sterile. I didn't realize until now how much our house had reflected his personality, not mine. This was a significant observation. For 20 years, Irene had lived in spaces designed by her captor. Now, for the first time, she was creating a space that was truly hers. She started therapy too, Irene said during one of our later sessions. A different therapist, someone who specializes in adolescent trauma. She's talking about things she never felt safe talking about before. What kind of things? Irene's face tightened. Things she noticed about her father that she was too scared to mention. Times when she caught him watching her friends a little too long. Comments he made that seemed wrong but that she couldn't articulate. She's been carrying so much, Sarah, for years, and I never knew. This is one of the cruel aspects of living with a predator. The children often sense something is wrong, but they lack the vocabulary to describe it. They lack the framework to understand it, and so they carry their suspicions in silence, afraid of being wrong, afraid of not being believed. And how are you two together? Irene smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from her. We're honest now, completely honest. No more secrets. No more pretending everything is fine. We cry together, we're angry together, and sometimes we even laugh together. She paused, and her eyes filled with a different kind of tears. Not grief, something closer to gratitude. She saved me, you know, Lily. She was the one who stole those photographs. She was the one who led police to the cabin. If she hadn't been watching, if she hadn't been brave enough to collect the evidence, Matthew might have continued Thomas's work. More women would have been hurt. A teenager, I thought, had done what trained investigators couldn't. She had seen through the mask that everyone else accepted. While the adults around her were fooled by Thomas's performance of normalcy, Lily had trusted her own instincts. Have you told her that? I asked. That she saved you? Irene nodded. Every day, I tell her every day, and I tell her something else too. I tell her that her instincts were right, that when something feels wrong, it's okay to pay attention to that feeling, that she doesn't have to silence her own inner voice the way I silenced mine. This, perhaps, was the most important lesson of all. Irene was teaching her daughter something she had never learned herself, to trust her own perceptions of reality, even when everyone around her was saying something different. But healing is not a destination, it's a direction, and Irene still had one more journey to make, one more confrontation, one more truth to face, and this time it wasn't about Thomas or Matthew. It was about herself. There's something I've been avoiding, Irene said during our 20th session, something I can't stop thinking about. I waited. Why didn't I know? Her voice was barely a whisper. 20 years of sleeping next to him, raising children with him, building a life with him, and I never knew. This was the question that tortured every survivor of intimate deception. The question that could curdle into self-blame if not addressed directly. What do you think that says about you? I asked. That I'm stupid, blind, weak. She spat the words out like poison. And what does the evidence actually show? She frowned. What do you mean? You were drugged, I said gently. For 20 years your perception was chemically altered. Your instincts, which were trying desperately to warn you, were dampened by substances you didn't know you were taking. She nodded slowly. You were isolated from your original support system. Thomas engineered your dependence on him from the very beginning. He positioned himself as your savior, your healer, your only safe harbor. Her eyes began to fill with tears. And you were working against one of the most sophisticated predators documented in clinical literature, a man who had been planning, learning, perfecting his techniques for decades, a man with no empathy, no conscience, and unlimited patience. I leaned forward. Irene, you didn't miss the signs because you were stupid. You missed them because they were designed to be invisible. You missed them because your own brain chemistry was being manipulated. You missed them because the man who was hurting you had turned your entire life into an elaborate stage set designed specifically to fool you. She was crying openly now. Not knowing doesn't make you weak, I continued. It makes you human. And finally knowing, finally seeing the truth that takes a kind of courage most people never have to summon. The last time I saw Irene in a formal therapy context, she looked different, not better in the simple sense trauma doesn't work that way, but settled, grounded, present in her own body in a way she hadn't been before. I sold the house, she said. Everything in it. I didn't keep a single thing that Thomas touched. Where are you living now? Lily and I have an apartment near the lake. It's small. The walls are thin. The neighbors are loud. She smiled. I love it. She was working again. Freelance graphic design. The career she had dreamed of when she was 19. The career Thomas had interrupted. Some days are still hard, she admitted. Some nights I wake up and I can still feel him there, that presence, that ownership. But then I remember that I'm free, really free, for the first time since I was 19 years old. I asked her what she wanted for her future. She thought for a long moment. I want to stop being defined by what happened to me, she said finally. I want to be more than a victim, more than a survivor. I want to be me, whoever that is. I'm still figuring it out. That's a worthy goal, I said. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Thank you, she said, for believing me, for not looking away when it got ugly, for sitting with me in the dark until I could find the light. I smiled. That's what this work is for. She nodded. And then she walked out, into the sunshine, into uncertainty, into a future that was finally, truly her own. I hope this story has helped you look at your own life, your own feelings, or the people around you with different eyes. I hope this story has helped you understand yourself and others. I would love to hear something about you in the comments to get to know you and your story a little more. If you want to share what's in your heart, you can write to the email address in my profile. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. To be notified about the next real-life story, click the bell icon to turn on notifications. Before we end, I want to ask you a few questions. Take a moment to think about them. What do you think about this story? Does Irene's journey remind you of anything in your own life or in the lives of people you know? Can wounds this deep truly heal? Or do we just learn to live with the scars? What does healing even mean when someone has suffered this much? If you discovered that everything you believed about your life was a lie, how would you rebuild? Where would you even begin? What would you say to the 19-year-old Irene if you could go back in time? And what would you say to the Irene who walked into my office, clutching a black mask on that first day? Do you think the body always knows the truth, even when the mind refuses to see it? Have you ever ignored a feeling that turned out to be right? And the hardest question, if you were Lily, would you have stayed silent to protect your mother's happiness? Or would you have spoken up, knowing it would destroy her world? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Your perspective matters. Your voice matters.